And Ambassador, my question is, what would this mean for other countries like the U.S. who are interested in forging, diplomatic relationship with Somaliland? Would this encourage other countries to step forward and really uh, be open to taking that step this time?
Yeah, we'll have to see how it plays out, because in the United States, our domestic politics are quite important in these kind of questions. But first of all, we have to see what is the actual deal going to be, because right now it's very indistinct. What kind of recognition will Ethiopia give Somaliland? When will it come about? There are different levels of diplomatic recognition, so we'll just have to see where that goes. But I do remember when I was ambassador to Ethiopia, and I got to know your president, President Igal, of the day, and he shared with me his frustration over the lack of recognition for Somaliland, which was a fully functional country that stood on its own 2 feet. And I absolutely sympathized with his frustration. And at the time, I asked around, and it seemed like there were a number of countries kind of waiting in the wings who would be willing to recognize Somaliland if another country recognized Somaliland. So we'll see how this plays out, but right now it seems very, very positive. But let's not make anything of it until something actually happens.
Ambassador, I do have a question, and this time maybe like, so for example, Ethiopia, like it's a pretty important country, not only in the context of the world, but within the African context. It's the home of the African Union, member of the United Nations. Do you think they can risk their international standing by going ahead and, with a deal of this type with Somaliland? Or can you foresee any international pressure that actually may force Ethiopia to kind of stand down or withdraw from its possible agreement with Somaliland on a naval base and such?
I hope not, because Ethiopia has a record of looking after its own interests, and of basically, when the international community is unhappy about something Ethiopia does, Ethiopia has a tendency to say, "Thank you very much for your opinion, but we're going to do what's in Ethiopia's interest." And I personally hope that that's what happens this time, because Ethiopia, with diplomatic recognition from Ethiopia, would be very, very significant for Somaliland. Because, as you said, I mean, the African Union, or the initial Organization of African Unity, was put in Addis Ababa because of Ethiopia's glorious history as, frankly, the only country in sub-Saharan Africa which had not been colonized by Europeans. So, Ethiopia is, with recognition from Ethiopia, I have to say it would be extremely, extremely significant and a very positive move for Somaliland.
Now, just so like a lot of there's been a lot of noise coming from our neighbors to the south, Somalia, or more specifically the federal, government of Somalia. And they seem to have actually gone ballistic and launched a severe diplomatic offensive against Ethiopia, while also whipping up an anti-Ethiopian nationalism, like basically getting, people to say, you need to oppose this code from the president by any means necessary. At the same time, ignoring that there is a large contingent of Ethiopian troops actually deployed in many parts of Somalia as part of the ATMIS mission. Do you think Somalia's rhetoric will lead to Ethiopia withdrawing its peacekeeping forces from Somalia? And if they do, how would such a move impact the fight against Shabab, the security of Somalia, and the entire region?
No, I don't think that to me is a totally separate issue, because again, countries do what is in their interest, and as long as Ethiopia decides that it is in their security interest to maintain forces in Somalia to, combat Al Shabaab, then they're going to, maintain that. I mean, I found it interesting that when this whole port deal came up, there was an initial flurry of, a lot of countries, including the United States, saying, oh, we all support the territorial integrity of Somalia. But it was kind of what I would say is a one-shot deal. There's been not much follow-up. So, I'm optimistic that the opposition, except from Somalia, will probably be subdued, and I think hopefully, people will get used to this concept.
Thank you, Master. Siham, Abdel Nasser.
Yes, I have a question. Ambassador, Somalia is a failed state as we know it, has been a failed state since we joined them, since 1960. Their last election was in 1967. Somali government as a whole has no jurisdiction over Somaliland. And Somaliland will never accept to be part of the federal model. And Somaliland was never part of the federal model. In fact, the model that Somaliland was part of no longer exists. So how can Somalia claim Somaliland or claim to represent Somaliland or have um, any sort of legitimacy over, bilateral deals that Somaliland goes into with neighboring countries?
Yeah, well, you can ask them how they think that they have a right to that. In my point of view, they have no rights whatsoever. Anybody who looks at the history of the issue, it's fairly clear cut. I mean, in many respects, the Somaliland issue has parallels to Eritrea. Eritrea had a colonial legacy. Ethiopia did not. And when the two countries are joined together, it was never a marriage made in heaven. And when the Derg was chased out of Ethiopia by both the Eritrean liberation forces and the Tigrayans, the Amharas, and the other liberation forces, Eritrea decided to go its own way because of its different legacy and different history from Ethiopia. And it's parallel situation. Somaliland had a totally different colonial history than Somalia, Mogadishu. And you guys tried a marriage. Certainly was not a marriage made in heaven, and you decided to end it. So I personally don't see where Somalia has any rights whatsoever to raise a fuss.